We would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, we acknowledge the importance of the land in which we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this nation home. Please join me in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and to consider how we can each, in our own way, move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. I'm connecting today from North Bay and would like to recognize that the land North Bay is on is in the territory of the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850, and that the land on which we gather is the Anishinaabe people and specifically the Nipissing First Nation. I encourage and invite you to recognize whose land that you are joining us from and let us know in the chat. To find out more about the land on which you reside, please visit native-land.ca.
Good afternoon and welcome. Thanks for joining us for our opener for season 4. I can't believe it's already been 4 seasons. I'm Rob Boulay, learning systems technologist for School of Business, Criminal Justice, and Social Work, and I use he and him for pronouns. With me is my colleague from the Teaching Hub.
Hi there, my name is Chris Bird, learning systems technologist in the Teaching Hub. We're excited to begin season 4 with you today and want to thank you for joining us. And if you haven't already, please check out some of last season's episodes covering topics such as designing for care, introducing micro-credentials, as well as designing for social change.
Upcoming this season, we have some fabulous humans new to their series and some returning guests to talk with us about learning empowerment and engagement on November 24th and pandemic fatigue and burnout on December 1st. So make sure you book those dates and we'll see you at noon on those days.
In today's episode, we'll be introducing the topic of cultivating safe spaces. It will be moderated by Dr. Sarah Driesens, the manager of e-learning in the Teaching Hub. Sarah was recently appointed as the new senior editor of Collected Essays on Learning and Teaching. Our next moderator is none other than Heather Carroll, senior instructional designer in the Teaching Hub. Now, Heather recently launched a project supporting teachers in Newfoundland and Labrador around developing an anti-racist pedagogical practice. This course saw such huge demand that it booked up within 36 hours of being launched. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Sarah Driesens and Heather Carroll.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for season 4. As Chris mentioned, my name is Sarah Driesens, and I'm the manager of e-learning in the Teaching Hub, and I use she, her pronouns. And I'm here with my amazing colleague, Heather Carroll.
Thanks, Sarah. Chris, you really said it all. My name is Heather Carroll. I also use she, her pronouns, and I'm very happy to be here. I'm going to pass it back to Sarah to introduce our guest, or one of our guests. I'll introduce the other, and then we will dive right into today's topic, cultivating safer spaces.
Wonderful. So I'm so grateful and excited to join and introduce our first guest. So Meg Moore is a Safer Spaces program coordinator located in North Bay. Meg works in community to create safer spaces for 2S LGBTQ+ folks. Meg is an experienced facilitator and has a passion for leading discussions to support our shared process of both unlearning and relearning. Before joining the Safer Spaces team, Meg spent 9 years in the settlement and immigration sector, creating programming to build safer and welcoming spaces for newcomers to Canada. Meg works at finding ways to center lived experiences and believes that those doing this work must recognize how the systems we work in often reinforce barriers to inclusion. As a queer person raised in Northern Ontario, Meg is grateful to be working on a team creating safer spaces for 2S LGBTQ plus folks in her community. And we are so grateful and excited to have you here with us today, Meg. Welcome.
I should start out every day with Sarah introducing me because I feel so good now. Thanks, Sarah.
Well, that's big shoes to fill, but I'm happy to introduce our second guest. Seth Compton is the founder and executive director of Out Loud North Bay. Seth is an experienced 2S LGBTQIA plus outreach worker with the Near North District School Board and has experience working with children and youth at risk for over 15 years. Seth is an advocate, mentor, and leader with the 2S LGBTQIA plus youth and allies in the community, and works to have the community invest in safer space for future generations, specifically with a focus on their social, emotional, and physical health. So welcome, Seth.
Thank you for having me.
So first and foremost, the biggest bow of gratitude to the both of you for taking time out of your exceptionally busy schedules to be here with us today and to share your lived experiences and your brilliance. The other piece too is I love that we're starting this conversation. It is a courageous, right, conversation about some complex issues, some complex topics, but it is not ending today. So can we just start with both of you, whoever wants to start first? And can you just tell us your stories?
You want me to go first, Meg? Yeah, okay. Thank you, guys. I feel grateful that we have a space like this, that we can carry a conversation so important like this today. My story started out when I was 3 years old. I knew when I was 3 that I was born in the wrong body. Back then, early mid 70s, early 80s, not a lot to identify with, right? Like we didn't have Ellen DeGeneres, we didn't have the RuPaul drag show, we didn't have all these celebrities coming out like, you know, Elliot Page. It just really was a time where there wasn't a lot of questions that could be answered for me. So I continued to kind of go through my life over the years, questioning, always questioning, continue to question. And then I met my wife about 19, 20 years ago. And it was a conversation that I had with her openly that, you know, I wasn't a lesbian. I was trapped in the wrong body. I should have been a boy. And I took that information. We just kind of went with it. And she said, you know, like I fell in love with you for your soul, not for who, you know, your physical body. And when your time comes, I'll be there to support you. So I went 20 more years because we had children, we got married, and I just figured I was creating more barriers for myself. It was difficult for me to go into a fertility clinic and have babies through artificial insemination and raise these kids thinking that I had another choice to make, but wasn't sure how to make that choice because I had already thought, like, how am I going to explain to my kids they're being raised by same-sex family? It just felt like there was more barriers. You know, and then we got married, all those things. It just felt like everything I was doing was just kind of creating that not going to happen. I'm not going to be able to transition. You know, I'm going to be stuck in the wrong body for the rest of my life. I moved from Hamilton up here 4 years ago. So North Bay is my hometown, and it really quieted my mind and my soul. So it kind of gave me time to reflect on me. And it was the first time at 43 years old that I actually invested in myself. And I thought, you know, at 43 years old, I want to be able to live the second half of my life authentically. And I started my transition. My kids are now 13, 15, and 25. And when I sat them down and said, hey guys, like you know, and this has been an open conversation with them, but I didn't want to create barriers for them either, right? Going into school and, you know, in a community that we're in right now is very closed-minded. There's a lot of work to do here, which is why, you know, Meg and I are doing what we're doing because we want to open eyes and open hearts. But it was a conversation that I had with them was, you know, are you guys going to be okay with this if I start my transition? And my 14-year-old says, like, I just want to see you happy. You know, so when you have kids, and right now, a lot of parents are not supporting their children I'm on the other end. My children are supporting me. And I couldn't imagine what it would be like without the support. I think I probably would have continued living in a very dark place had I not been given that opportunity to start my transition. So I've been in transition for 3 years now. Out Loud was kind of born. As my transition started, I just realized that I wasn't the only one in town, looking for a safe space and wanting to be able to meet people like me. When I first moved to North Bay, I was like, where are all the gay people? I couldn't see anybody. Nobody was visible. Now that we've created this space, I have a ton of kids. Parents have come out to me, and everybody's just kind of sharing that journey. And it's just been a real whirlwind of emotions and can be very overwhelming when you know that you've put in a little bit of work to create such a cool spot. So yeah, I mean, that's basically my story. I mean, I've been through some dark days. I've been through, depression, anxiety, suicide. I've tried it all, and it was because I wasn't happy. And it's not like you can describe mental health and your identity all in the same bucket, because they're really two different things. Because I wasn't able or didn't have that support for my identity, I was struggling with some other things. So they come together eventually, but at the same time, right now I'm just living my best life.
Thank you for sharing, Seth. And that's such a beautiful story. And I started welling up, especially when you talk about your children. As a mother, I have 2 young children, and just, yeah, I love that. I love that reframe. It's absolutely beautiful. So thank you so much. Meg, throwing it over to you.
Thanks, Sarah. And thanks, Seth, for starting us off and being vulnerable and sharing. So I'm from here. I grew up in Corbeil, went to high school in North Bay, actually went to university in Hamilton, so where Seth was beforehand, and then came back here. I didn't come out until my early 20s. And the reason I didn't come out till in my early 20s was not because I was concerned that my family wouldn't accept me, that my family wouldn't love me. I really just didn't know it was even an option. So I identify as queer. And for me, that means I could be attracted to any gender. And it happened to work out for me when I was, a teenager, that the people that I dated happened to be guys. So it wasn't as, it was something that I could kind of push aside. But I really didn't know that, like, being attracted to multiple genders was even an option. So I didn't feel like I was in the closet, because it wasn't even a thing that could be. And not until I went away to school and, you meet new people, you're living on your own. And I met other queer people that were in lots of different kinds of relationships. And I went like, bang, wait, this is an option. Like, this is actually an option. And then my coming out story was very quick. I came out to myself, came out to my sister, started dating my girlfriend, and then 2 weeks later came out to my family. It was all very, very fast, because once it clicked, it clicked. But it was still challenging, and I really feel like I have one of the a really warm, fuzzy coming out story, at least in terms of my core family. There was never a doubt in my mind, and they responded such. But what I saw I was out, I was working with queer organizations in Hamilton. I came back to North Bay, and I suddenly found myself in the closet, but not because I wanted to be in the closet, but similar to what Seth said, it was where are all the gays? What's happening? So I was kind of at the closet at work. I was working in retail, mainly because if I mention, going to the movies with my girlfriend on the weekend, I get weird looks or people telling me not to use work as a soapbox. I actually lost a job locally, specifically because I mentioned that I had a girlfriend. And so I was desperate for community. I had such connection to community when I was in Hamilton, and not because people in Hamilton are necessarily better or more open-minded than people in Northern Ontario. There's more spaces to facilitate that kind of connection. And so I worked jobs as time went on, I, like you mentioned, Sarah, in my bio, before working in safer spaces, I worked at the Multicultural Center, helping to build welcoming spaces for newcomers to Canada. And newcomers to Canada, of course, are also part of queer and trans community. But as I did the work, as I brought training to town, as I engaged with service providers and employers, I consistently heard like, hey, there's this really awesome free training. It's free. People are coming from Toronto. You just have to show up. I'm going to feed you. And consistently I heard, that sounds great. I love gay people. I love Will and Grace. My brother's gay. No problem with gay people. We just don't have anybody. We don't have any clients that are gay or trans, if they even knew what the word trans meant. So my manager won't prioritize me being out of the office, or the manager would just be like, it's great, but we don't have anybody. And how do you engage people in competently serving folks if they don't even believe the folks exist? So we at the Multicultural Center applied for funding from Trillium, the North Bay Positive Spaces Research Project, which I'll ask Rob or Chris to stick that link in the chat there, basically to prove to people that there's queer and trans people in North Bay. Seth and I know there's people, we know there's people. We didn't even necessarily know where to find people because there's no queer bar, there's no queer area of town, there's no queer cafes. And sometimes I kind of felt like when I would see someone that I would connect with, or I'm like, I think they're queer, I felt like the dog at the dog park. We were just like so excited to see other queers. And so this research really helped frame for the community and for myself, like there are folks here and they have needs. And what I was surprised at, I knew that we had folks here, we'd run events and things like that, but how desperate people were to feel like they belong. And this is going from like 10-year-olds all the way up to 85. You know, we'd host events where it was just like a drop-in, like come play board games and drink coffee. Like we have nothing really to offer other than space. This is pre-out loud. And people would show up and it'd be like grandparents with their 10-year-old grandchild who is trans and an 85-year-old who just came out. And so you had this like massive diverse community with lots of different needs. And so I really encourage folks, if you're interested in this work, to check out that research because it's the lived experiences of local 2S LGBTQ plus folks. What does it feel like to be like, you know, to be living as a queer person or a trans person or a two-spirit person in North Bay? And for me, it was really validating, and I incorporate this into my story because also I wanted to feel visibility. I wanted to help facilitate, like, you know, I didn't come out till I was in my 20s, but that's because I didn't even know that that was a thing that I was going to do. And so I love doing this work and I love connecting with other queers. I like to call myself a rural queer. We have kind of different needs than like, you know, Toronto centric stuff, which so many things are. But like, literally we're here, we're queer, and, you know, let's change North Bay to like North Gay and like all the things. There's so many queer and trans and two-spirit folk here. We just don't always have a place to gather. It was kind of amping up pre-pandemic, and then of course pandemic happened and here we are. But yeah, that's kind of my story, I guess.
Thanks so much for sharing. And just for our audience, we're going to be using a discussion protocol today. A liberated structure is what it's officially called, following the structure of what, so what, and now what. So we're going to segue into our first question, which is very simply, according to both of you, what are safe spaces? I know you touched on that a little bit in your story, but let's dive in. Whoever wants to take that.
Well, Seth wasn't unmuting, so I guess I'll go. I like to use safer spaces, and that's a way of saying like no space can guarantee to be safe. What's safe for me is not necessarily safe for Seth, and vice versa. And so if we're trying to be safer, it's a commitment to an ongoing process. Like we're not there, it's not an arrival. It's a process that we're always working on. So to me, safer spaces or a safer space is there's so many things, but one would be transparency. So transparency on what you can do, what you're not set up to do, what you're willing to do, who's there, why are they there? So things like, do you have all gender washrooms? Do you have, are there any barriers to getting in your space? Is there a ramp or is there only stairs? Do you have like queer trans folks working there, or at least people that are competent? Are they trained? What happens if somebody says something homophobic or transphobic? How does staff respond? Do you have a policy? And also in those policies, how do you respond to feedback? Feedback is so important to me because nobody can get it right all the time. Things are always changing and none of us are perfect. But if folks are open to feedback and responding to that feedback, then I'm going to want to engage with that space, even if you don't get it right, even if you've been harmful. If you said like, I'm so sorry that happened, like I want to hear more about that. Is there a way that we could incorporate that into a policy or facilitate some restorative justice or something like that? And I mean, and an overarching is just like, I can be out if I want to be out, but it's up to me. It's not up to, is it safe here? Because so much of queer and trans and two-spirit folks' life, especially in North Bay, is, yes, there's some spaces that are safer. There's some services that are competent, or people at services that are competent, but it's all question marks. And so we're always assessing like, ooh, that person shared their pronouns. Oh, wait, but then they use this word. And, you know, is it safe for me to share right now? Is it going to prevent me from accessing service? So can I share? Can I bring my whole self into your space? Or am I having to leave a part of myself, regardless of what the service is, even if it's employment services or going to pay my taxes at City Hall? Do I have to like make my partner like stand over there just in case, I don't know, I'm going to have a bad interaction? And I'll stop there.
Thanks, Meg. I like that emphasis on the process and not the state of arrival, or, you know, there's no final point. It's always ongoing. Seth, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, everything Meg said is exactly what we've implemented here at Out Loud. You know, from accessibility to, you know, bringing in the volunteers. Our space here is operated strictly on volunteers. We have 45 adults from the community that have invested in this space with me. And that process for me was super important to make sure that I brought in the right adults, you know, especially dealing with the kids that we see ranging from 6 to 19 years old. You know, we want to make sure that, you know, some of the littler ones that are a little bit more vulnerable are able to connect with the people that I've brought into the space and not just me. Yeah, everything else that Meg said, basically, you know, we've got policies and procedures in place, and, you know, we sat down with a team and created those to make sure that, you know, we are operating to, you know, that idea of safer, right? We do have a washroom that's gender neutral. It's funny, I had a parent come in here and were like, well, you know, kind of questioned me on it. And I said, you know, sharing her the same story I shared with you guys last week was, you know, not everybody has to get out of bed every day and map the city of where I can stop to use the washroom. The kids know, and when I give them a tour of the space, I let them know what can and can happen and what we, you know, what's usable, what's not usable. Like, we kind of go through everything. And the washroom for them, they don't care. The kids don't care, right? We're teaching them that it's okay to share the same washroom facilities, right? There's a lot of us that have been raised and taught differently. So when you did Meg's introduction, we talked about relearning and unlearning. That's what we promote here so much, because there's a lot of parents that are my age that come in the doors that have been raised just like me. And it really is that process of unlearning and just kind of understanding, you know, unconditional love. And it's something that you want to promote in the space. You want to be able to, you know, come into the doors and feel that warmth, that, you know, safe environment. And that's what we've created. And I think everybody deserves a space like that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Seth. And thank you, Meg, for that focus on the process piece, right? And the other piece that you both kind of tapped into, and we picked up on it in our chat last week, was this idea of humility. So I've been immersed in social justice work, activist work for a number of years. It's where I started my university career. And I mean, Meg, you said something to me last week that stopped me in my tracks, right? And just when you think, maybe I've arrived, you're like, nope, can never fully arrive, right? It is that continual process. And I love sort of this reframe of unlearning and relearning. And for me, I add another piece for myself. I'm still learning, right? That relearning doesn't end either. And so let's chat a little bit then. We'll dive a bit deeper into sort of the so what. because I think this is really important for folks to hear. So when we're talking about safer spaces, why should I care, right? As an educator, as an administrator, as a human being, why should I care about cultivating a safer space? And a little bit deeper into that, what are the potential risks or the benefits of cultivating these safer spaces?
I'll go first. I don't know if anybody follows me on social media, but just 2 days ago, I actually connected with a teacher that taught me in grade 3. So after 40 years, we went for coffee. It was a beautiful thing because there's always a teacher or somebody in a facility that always leaves their mark on children. When I have kids come into the space, they describe the space as their light, right? So when you have kids that have struggled with, abuse at home, food insecurities, identity, all of those things, and they come in here and they feel like that, I know I've done something good. But going back to the importance of having teachers play a huge part, and they're nurturing our children to be the best that they can be in their future self, right? So it's very important that we tap into, creating those relationships. And when you create those relationships with your students, you're creating that safety, that safe zone, right? That safer space. When you have teachers that are not unlearning and not putting in the effort to understand and acknowledge, it really puts a student into a whirlwind of different emotions, right? You're going to have loss of interest in their program. You're going to have them not showing up at school. They start to lose interest very quickly. So it's very important to create that relationship with your students. And I think that, I have a couple people that I am very fond of, have molded me from a very young child. I went through some stuff when I was younger, foster care, my mom's recovering alcoholic. And had it not been for these teachers in my life, I'm not sure where I'd be today. So I think it's really important that we're able to provide that relationship. Teachers get into this role or this job for this reason, not just to teach, but that you have to have some sort of purpose there. There has to be some sort of willingness to say, this is the role I chose in my life, and how am I going to make a difference? It can be that simple. It really can be that simple.
Thanks for sharing your story there with connecting with your teachers. I think it's such a good reminder that these aren't just people over here. These are people in front of you and connections that you're still making. So what? That's such a big question, and there's so many different ways to come at it. In the Safer Spaces program, we try to come at it, and we keep kind of trying to find new ways to come at it, because you can come at it with the stats. Here are the horrifying stats. Here are the feel good, warm things. Here and everything in between. And so I'll do a little bit of all of it, I think. So what is, kind of like what you said, Sarah, because you're a human being, because we should care about each other. But I think before the so what is kind of what I was talking about in my story, is that people believing, I think the disconnect is people don't believe that these experiences are as bad or as prevalent or pervasive as they are. Because if you really believed it, then I think most folks that would move the mark into, okay, I get why we need to have the thing because of all these experiences. And so one very startling fact, but very, very clear to understand, is when we look at suicide rates among trans folks in comparison to the average Canadian population. And Seth already briefly chatted about this. When we look at Canada, just everybody in Canada, 12% of the population has seriously considered suicide. When we look at Ontario specifically, and trans folks in Ontario, it skyrockets to 77%. That's across all economic things, that's across all different genders, that's across all different parts of Ontario and trans folks, but it shoots to 77%. So seriously considering suicide. And when we look at people who have attempted suicide, so tried to die by suicide, 3% of the Canadian population, that's everybody, has attempted suicide. But when we look at trans folks, it goes up to 44%, nearly half. And so why is that a thing? Why, like that's not like, you know, a slight increase. That is nearly half of trans folks in Canada have attempted suicide, but survived it. They're survivors of suicide attempts. And so there's lots of different things we can talk about in terms of like how to navigate systems. Are people even able to get the services that they need? The answer is generally no, or it's only because trans folks are so resilient and are able to facilitate having advocates that they're able to survive the systems. But also it speaks to the experiences that folks are having in their everyday. And I'll offer you a good news piece of like, oh my gosh, that's horrifying. What can we do about it? So pronouns, we all have our pronouns in our Zoom names. We introduce ourselves with our pronouns. And why that's so important is we've been taught, so it's normal. I just want to normalize that this happens. We're taught that we can assume people's pronouns. Someone that looks like me that has the name Meg should always have pronouns she, her. Right, that's what we're taught. But what we know is that that's like, you know, all of these rules are made up. We've made up, humans have made up that pronouns are a thing and pronouns belong to these types of bodies and people that look like this and sound like this and have names like this. But that's not the case. Just like I can't assume by looking at Sarah, I'm going to guess her name. You really cannot guess somebody's pronouns. And so that's why we're putting them here, right? Is we're encouraging people, even though like misgendering isn't something that I generally experience because I'm cis. And also just how I present myself. It's still important for me to do that work because I am creating space, hopefully for people to share pronouns or people to test out the questions on me versus maybe somebody who's trans or non-binary, and I can help navigate that. But what we know with pronouns and why it's so important, often I get to like, what's the big deal? It's not a big deal. By using somebody's correct pronouns, you can reduce suicide ideation so that 77% by half. You can reduce it by 49% by using somebody's correct pronouns. That's something that we can do literally 10 seconds from now. So what a huge impact that can have. And so that means that using people's correct pronouns, not assuming, checking in with people and using neutral language until you're able to find out is suicide prevention. And I don't know about you, but usually suicide prevention things are like strategies and tactics, and there's 4 tiers to it. And okay, let's implement this support, and also let's do safety planning. It's complicated, and it should be. This is something very clear that everybody has the ability to do. And so the so what is, it's also in some ways easy. We have to let go of our own attachments to what rules we think should be. And even if you don't think that trans is a real identity, let's just say you're one of those folks that's like, this isn't real, this isn't a thing. Imagine letting go of that and just believing that people need these things in order to survive life. Okay, what does it cost me to check in with somebody's pronouns? Do I care about people surviving life and feeling safe? Like, what does it cost me? And people feel so attached. And we're taught to feel so attached. You know, you can't use they, them. That's grammatically incorrect. I have no problem with trans and gay people, but that's not grammatically correct. In actuality, it is grammatically correct, and we use it all the time, and it's been used for centuries. But we've attached that when we're talking about one person, when I'm talking about Seth, I should not be using they, them because I see Seth in front of me, for example. But if I'm talking about, hey, yeah, I was just talking to this person, they told me to turn left over there, and they left their tomato over there. You know, I'm talking about one person. We do that all the time. We've just created these intricate rules and we're so attached to them for what? It's all made up. Gender's made up. You know, it's not found naturally in nature. Pronouns are not found naturally in nature. And so the so what is the so what is like so many things, is that there's some people that know better than you, people with lived experience, people that work in the field, but more specifically, people with lived experience. And if we just believe people, oh my gosh, if we just believe people, we can get so far. And so the so what is, it really, in some ways, it's very easy. You don't have to understand what gender identity means or even what trans means in order to be respectful and affirming. You go, yes, I will use that word, even if you have no idea what it means. And so that was a good therapeutic rant for myself. So thanks for the space.
That was beautiful, though.
That was tough for me to hear, actually. I'm not gonna lie. I got the lump in my throat, because I am one of those statistics, and it sucks that I have to hear people talk like that and hear those numbers. And I think that's one of the reasons what really lit my fire, creating a space like this, because especially with COVID coming in, it was like it amplified that like 100 times. I mean, I had kids calling me, video chatting me from the hospital because they were suicidal and they just couldn't handle it anymore, being isolated, identifying as trans or whatever they were, being stuck at home every single day, 24 hours a day, right? So when we created this space and it gave those kids an outlet, you could see the light and how light they were when they were here. But when 9:30 rolls around, you can see the level of anxiety start to rise because they have to go home. But I mean, it's so important just to, when we think about just treating people as humans instead of an identity, it just makes so much more sense. And when you create those relationships with your teachers or coworkers or employers or whatever it may be, just from my own personal experience, that's my light at the end of the tunnel, right? And it's life-saving. It really is life-saving when you have those people that you can make that connection with and know that someone's going to be there for you.
And thank goodness you're there, Seth. And that just shows that, like, even though you're not these young people's parent, that there's a space and there's a person that's an adult that, like, not only has gone through similar things, but also is just an adult who is affirming. It makes such a difference. And the stats also show that too, that kids with an affirming parent, actually not even affirming, a supportive parent, a parent that doesn't go, no, not a parent that's an expert, not a parent that has all the resources available, but it's just a support or one adult, it literally is a life or death difference. And so thank goodness you're there, Seth, and you've facilitated this space, because you're not just helping the youth, you're also helping the parents, that, like, you're modeling that this is the thing that you can do, right? And also that you're a resource.
That was another reason why I decided to share my personal journey online. So, I started on Instagram, and it was, talking about my mental health and talking about being trapped in the wrong body and talking about not having a lot of support in my family, but it was where I was going to find happiness. And, once I had that conversation with my wife and my kids, at that point, that's all that really mattered to me. I didn't care about anything else. And I try to explain that to parents. Like, if your kid knows at the end of the day, they have somewhere to come home to and an accepting person on, in that space, it's a life changer. It's I can't stress that enough. It's crazy when you think about it. Something so simple.
Yeah. And I just wanted to share one other thing on that, Sarah and Heather, if I could. If we think about the tropes that we see, and especially in media or movies, about like a trans person's mental health and how stable they are, right? I mean, it's already pathologized. You have to, but you have to go through the medical system in order to access some of the medical transition care. But rarely is a trans person presented as a mentally stable or healthy person. But what the stats show us is that somebody that has medically transitioned in Canada, a trans person who has medically transitioned in the way that they want, whether that involves surgeries or electrolysis or hormones, all of them or none of them, the suicide attempts go down from 44% to 1%, which is less than the general Canadian population. So on average, they're mentally healthier, or we could say less suicidal and less to engage in that by 3 times than the average Canadian population. That's certainly not what we're presented, though. Certainly not what we're presented. And these stats are important because it helps illustrate these stories that happen, but how our systems are rigged against it. The pathologizing of trans folks, and then people having to go through all this stuff. And so the so what is gosh, it's so many things, just like Seth said.
And I've literally, like, in the last month, have been able to set up 8 different children with the proper avenues and cares of pathway cares, whatever, cares of pathway, whatever, you know what I'm trying to say, to get started on hormone therapy. So I actually have 8 kids in here that have started either, estrogen or testosterone. Without that information for the parents to come in here and say, hey, how did you get started? I have doctors calling me here. I have a patient, I don't know where to start. Can I get your help? And it's literally just that phone call away. So when we're able to tap into some of our local resources and kind of come together, we're able to save people, right? It really is a life-saving tool. When I tell parents that they come in here and I'm like, listen, these are your, this is how you start. This is where you go. You're going to talk to this person. You're going to, move along this ladder of care. And if you don't, and you think it's a phase, even if it is a phase, let's support it right now. Let's support it because you're going to see the difference in the mental health, in the way that child acts, the way they sleep, the way they eat, like just their overall health and well-being. It changes. You don't support it and you'll be planning a funeral, right? Because it's really, the numbers are there. The statistics are there. I used to be a number until I decided to focus on myself. I put my care, who knew? I started sharing my journey online and I wanted to be that voice for kids. And that's exactly where I'm at right now. I don't have the training and the skills that Meg has. There's a lot under her belt where, you've put in the research, you put in the time. For me, it's more of the experience. What can I do to help you, right? And that's where I'm at.
And just to root it in North Bay, and going back to that Positive Spaces research project, in that project, the question was asked, are service providers safe for 2S LGBTQ plus folks to access? And services that includes hospitals, school, basically anything that's not a private business, like taking the bus, paying your taxes, anything, employment services, settlement services. And only 16% said yes. Only 16% said yes. Now, the rest of it was divvied up between not sure, don't know, and no. But what that means is that those people are having the safety plan anyways. As I'm sure Seth can attest to that, even my own employer, I wouldn't say that you're guaranteed to have an affirming experience in the same way all the time. But what we do know, I'm sure Seth knows or has experiences like that. Okay, not that whole organization, but that person there, talk to that person there and they will do a good job. And so what we need in North Bay and everywhere is consistency. And that's why we need the transparency, because then if you're not there, okay, you don't have an all gender washroom, tell me that and tell me what you're doing about it. Is it in the plan? Are you going to give me access to a different washroom? Are you telling people that even though the signage doesn't say all gender, that staff are going to enforce it if that's what people need? Like, where are you at so that I can safety plan? And that's why things like sharing our pronouns and doing the different kind of work lets people know that we're thinking about these things and they're able to safety plan. Because if I use a wheelchair, let's say, and a place, I'm going to a concert and the concerts, we're accessible and I buy the ticket, I show up and it's stairs. I am going to be very upset, and I should be, versus if I didn't know what they had and then I'm going to have to do research. Still terrible, but at least you're not facilitating people like harm and facilitating people sharing their identities. And that's why things just putting up a rainbow sticker can be dangerous if you haven't done the work, because you're inviting people to share their identity. And then if you're like, I don't know what that means, or we don't do that here, like rip that rainbow sticker off.
Yeah.
Do the work, right? Is what it is.
Yeah.
I have so many thoughts.
It's funny because I just had a follow-up appointment with my endocrinologist because I'm planning my hysterectomy, and she asked me if I felt safe enough to do it here in North Bay, and I said no. I will travel down south where I can be assured that there are LGBTQ safe surgeons to do that operation. Even though I've been working with the hospital here in North Bay, They've started to create policies and procedures on 2S LGBTQ care, trans care. And again, it's a lot of older folks, right? Doctors, nurses that are older in generations, and it's just something that they're so stuck on. But again, you can compare this to teachers, right? You didn't become a nurse or a doctor to start choosing who you could care for, right? And it's the same thing as a teacher. You can't choose who you build relationships with. You're a teacher, you're in there to build a relationship with every single student so that they feel safe. So it's crazy that I have to go through those steps again, just to make sure that I'm looking after myself and that I feel safe. But things are changing. They're, slow and steady, one day at a time. And people like us, getting together, having these safe talks, conversations. I tell the kids and the parents all the time, talk, communicate, talk, right? As much as you can, promote that message. And that's the only way things are going to change, is if we are a voice.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think things are changing. It's palpable, right? It's on the tips of our tongues. We just need a little bit more support. So I'm gonna pass it over to Heather for the final question. But before I do, the one piece I kind of wanted to tap into to bring it back sort of to the educational space is we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? We start with the necessities, which is I am hungry, I am thirsty. That's why we have breakfast programs in elementary schools. The next level up is safety. So if we think and get curious, and sit still with that idea, how can I succeed as a student if I don't feel safe, right? And I think that's a big piece that a lot of educators really need to get curious about. And you've both shared some really amazing reasons as to why, right? I just wanted to kind of circle back to that. The other piece that we didn't even talk about is that it's actually a legal obligation, right? And so we could probably have a side conversation about that. But I just wanted to throw it out there that it's not just about personal opinion, that there is actually a responsibility there and there is accountability. And so I will pass it over to Heather to sort of round us off with the, okay, now what, right? Where do we go from here?
And what resonated with me was when Seth said that, you don't go into teaching just to have, pick and choose who you care for. And I think that's the same with higher education faculty and staff as well. We know that the university space is embedded in the cis hetero patriarchy. So we can't just exist in that space as neutral. We have to, strive to make a difference for all students. And I think, Meg, especially with your stats and your, passion about pronoun use, that gives folks a tangible action item to take away that they can do to create a safer space. So finally, our last question, as Sarah mentioned, now what? So for those who are listening, we have some awesome comments as well, pouring in the YouTube chat of pronouns and why they're important. So for our audience, what would you say to them? How do they start to cultivate a safe or a safer space? And what unlearning and relearning do folks that you've interacted with generally need to do? So I know that's a multi-pronged question. I'll let you think about it for a second and then want to chime in.
Yeah, now what? There's lots of things. But if I could categorize them, I would say really question and kind of like using the language you're using there, Sarah, but getting curious. Ask yourself, how do I know what I think I know? How do I know that Sarah uses she, her pronouns? Did Sarah tell me? Or did I assume? Have I just heard other people? How do I know that this person uses this language for their body? How do I know that they use the word breast and not chest? How do I know these things? And then we go, I just made it up. And again, it's normal that you're doing that because that's of course our training. And of course, that's the unlearning and the relearning, is that questioning everything. And if you are questioning everything of where you're getting your knowledge, then you have to ask questions. Then you have to make space for people. Then you have to ask about people's pronouns. And if you can't, or you don't feel comfortable, or it's not appropriate or whatever, there's lots of things you can do. You can use they, them. You can use the person's name. You can say, Sarah over there with the glasses, for example. Lots of other things that you can use. Another thing is, and I'll speak to this as like a queer person too, is that like, don't use queer and trans and two-spirit folk as your Google. There is already Google. Google can give you a lot. So you want to know what that word means that, Seth just used? Write it in your phone or whatever and go Google it. I guarantee you there's 30 amazing articles from people with lived experience. There's YouTube videos. There's people whose job it is, like me, to tell you, or like point you to some things. Unless that person is offering it up, that's a lot of emotional labor, right? It's a little bit like share your trauma porn with me so that I can like understand. Okay. It's okay to ask questions. Like, for example, if someone said to me, they use a word that maybe I'm not familiar with, or just I want to know more about it. One, do I get to know? Do I have a right to know? Like, do I need this in order to provide care? Do I need this to provide service? Is this an appropriate exchange? But at most, it could just be like, what does that mean to you? Or is there anything else you need me to know about that in order to serve you or be your friend or whatever, right? So it's not about you getting what you need, but you're offering, like, is there anything else that you need to tell me about that? So not assuming, which is really just like pretend you don't know anything. Don't use the community as your Google, and people do that all the time. I just need to hear people's stories in order to understand. So inappropriate, so gross, so gross. No, go talk to somebody else that you have an emotional relationship with, or go to the Google. And with that whole Googling thing, there's tons of resources, and reach out, like do the work. You can, there's so many like Instagram profiles you can follow that has like little bite-sized things that you can do. Go to events and activities that involve like trans and queer and two-spirit folk. I'll just do a little plug there. So this week is Trans Awareness Week. That's why I have the trans flag behind me. Leading into Saturday, November 20th, which is Trans Day of Remembrance. And if you haven't heard of Trans Day of Remembrance, you're not totally sure what it is. Myself and some colleagues are running a session. If you can put it in the chat there, you can find it on Eventbrite. It's a Trans Day of Remembrance learning session. It's just a half hour. What is it? Why is this important? And then some resources and some local resources too. So go to those things. If there's a bakery that's owned by queer people, go to that bakery. You go to the mall to use the washroom, there's no all gender washroom. Maybe it's not something you need, but go tell people, why don't you have an all gender washroom? You need to have an all gender washroom, even if it's not relevant to your own personal lived experience. And just make space for people. Make space and be willing to be told that you're wrong. And when someone corrects you, for example, if someone corrects you, you use the wrong pronoun or you misgender somebody and someone corrects you, it's normal for us to respond like, defensively, like I didn't mean it, or I'm really tired, or like it's so hard, okay, or like it's not a big deal. All of those really gross. You just apologize, correct yourself, and move on. But also, if someone's sharing with you, that means they're invested in a relationship with you. You should be thanking them. If I don't care about you and I don't care about our relationship, and you're too much work to educate, I might not even mention it to you. So if someone's correcting you, even if it's hard to hear, they're saying, I know you can do better. I want you to do better. I want to have a good relationship with you, whether that's personal or professional. But we should really be welcoming that feedback, because that's the only way that we're going to do better, is if we actually hear from folks who this affects.
What we do here, just to kind of follow up with that, Meg, is all the kids that come into the space create their own little pronoun button. So it's kind of like an arts and craft kind of thing where they, get the materials, they make their button with their name on it, put their pronouns, and that's how we introduce them. Or I have some kids that'll come up into a group and go pronoun check, just to make it kind of fun. It's that learning experience, right? It's that, hey, we're in a space where we can all just be who we want to be. And posters, kids create posters and we hang those up for that teachable moment, right? Like anything that is a visual for the kids to look at is important, right? Because they're like, oh, there's the sign with all the rules on it. Oh, we're not supposed to use bad words, or we're not, if you provide those little bits of information throughout the space in your classroom setting, I with Near North, I created a poster, a safe space poster, and it was just like a 101, safe space 101. Take that, we're going to hang it in a classroom, and then it's a discussion piece, right? Now you're creating conversations with the kids about topics that can be sensitive or other things that we need to educate the kids and teachers on. And then it becomes that, that space where they can, sorry, there's just an emergency alert that just
Yeah, it's going on my phone too.
Yeah. So yeah, that's, it's all the little simple things that you could do that are so simple that can create change. And we got to start with the simple things first.
And like what Seth's really speaking to there, and what I hope I was speaking to, is like setting people up for success on both sides. Like, let's set up the educator for success, even if that educator sits in head. Like, how can you be successful and connect with students? You need to know their pronouns. You need to know what facilitates safety. How can you do that if you don't know? So let's set yourself up for success, and also the students, because how are the students going to know the things, who you are, what you value, how you'll respond to things, what you'll tolerate, if you don't tell them? There's so many things that we just assume. And like, and my last kind of thing I'll say about this little chunk here is that North Bay people, I hear a lot, is like, I'm a good person. My client would tell me, my student would tell me I'm a good person. They would tell me if they're queer. They would tell me if they had this experience. And like, maybe, but also that doesn't matter, because maybe that person, their own parent disowned them when they came out, or the police officer kicked the shit out of them, or a healthcare worker denied them care. All has happened in North Bay. I personally know of it. I'm sure Seth also knows of it. And the research shows it too. So why are they going to trust you, Sarah, no matter how nice you seem, unless you outright really demonstrate this in a consistent way, in written form, in your actions, what you talk about, the audio visual stuff you have, who are you talking about? Because people have to safety plan. And so it's not enough just to be a smiling good person. You have to be, let people know where you're at. And it's not about getting it perfect. It's letting folks know that you'll do better if they tell you that you messed up, for example. Yeah.
That slightly kind of goes back to, sharing the part of my story where I have to create a map of the city of washrooms that I can go into. You know what I mean? It really is that simple to, put a sign up on your door if you're an operating business, or if you're a facility, or, right now with Near North, they are any new builds, they're putting in gender neutral washrooms. With some of the older schools, they're creating that separate space, right? Whether it's for family, an identity, disabled, it's still a washroom that can be used by everyone. And that's something that needs to kind of continue to happen. People have to put in the work. It's the only way we're going to change. I keep going back to that word change, but it's so big. It's so big. And it really does just take small little steps to get to where we need to be as a community.
Yeah. And I think we've all said it, like, do the work, like, be consistent, right? What you're saying, Meg, be consistent in how you show up, online, synchronously, asynchronously, on paper, face to face, right? In your community, how do you show up? Make space, right? And the other piece that I want folks listening who might be thinking, this is hard work. Yes, 100% wholeheartedly, this is hard work. You need to lean into it. You need to lean into the discomfort, right? Because as you start to have these conversations internally, externally, pieces are going to bubble up, and you may not, right, have realized that about yourself, about how you think, how you act, the harm that it can cause somebody. I encourage you as much as possible to lean into that discomfort, right? Because that is where change happens, to come back to your word, Seth, right? That is how we make change. That is how we as a community grow. So I'm just so grateful to both of you. Like, I have chills. I have no words to thank you for what you've shared with us, for what you've gifted us, You are both energy gifting people. And I think that this is the start of a part 2 conversation that we all might need to circle back to at some point, because I've literally made like a novel of notes. That I have so many things I really want to just continue diving deeper and deeper into this. But thank you again once more, the deepest vow of gratitude to you both for being here, for sharing, being vulnerable, making space, and being advocates and champions in the community. And thank you to everybody for tuning in. Thank you to you, Heather, and Chris and Rob behind the scenes. And we'll see everybody again next week.
Thank you guys
so
so
much,
much.
folks.
Take care.